Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. In this episode, I get to interview Supervisory Special Agent Kathy Lambert, who served 20 years with the FBI. Kathy is an expert in counter-terrorism. As a matter of fact, when she joined the FBI in 1995, she had already earned a Ph.D. in political science with a concentration in counter-terrorism. She knows what she's talking about, and it was fascinating having a chance to interview her. Kathy worked her entire career focused on terrorism investigations. Kathy actually supervised the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF, in Philadelphia and in the Philadelphia South Jersey Resident Agency. She gives so much credit to our law enforcement partners and talks about how by working with local, state, and federal agencies, we're able to combine our expertise, our resources, and our manpower to work terrorism cases. It really is a great interview. She talks about some of the well-known investigations that she worked, including the infamous homegrown terrorist Jihad Jane. She also talks about another case and about her temporary duty TDY assignments around the world. Now, this interview was scheduled way before we knew anything about the events that would occur this week in Brussels. It is a timely interview. It really gives an understanding to everyone, including me, about the work that is done every day to keep the United States safe. One last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the interview. I need to give a special thank you to everyone who sent along that wonderful birthday gift. I'm talking about going to iTunes and rating and reviewing FBI Retired Case File Review. Thank you so much. It just made me so happy to see all the people who responded and the ratings that flowed in. Thank you so much. That lets me know for sure that you are enjoying the podcast and that you appreciate everything that I'm doing. So thank you. I did not get a chance to read any crime fiction this week. It was a busy week. I did a number of interviews so I can kind of get ahead of myself. But I have a few things I want to talk to you about. But let's talk about those after the interview. So I'll see you on the other side. Here's the show. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today, Kathy Lambert. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Jerry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm very excited because this is very timely because of the things that are happening in Brussels and terrorism this week.
Sure.
I think we are absolutely very fortunate to be able to speak with you today because you're definitely an expert in this field. You've been working counterterrorism for all of your career. So I'm very excited to speak with you, not necessarily about the events that occurred this week, but it will give us a better understanding of the work that the FBI does to prevent these type of incidents.
Sure.
So thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Sure.
All right, so let's start off, though, from the very beginning, because it does sound like you knew exactly what you wanted to do in the FBI when you joined. So what were you doing before you joined the FBI?
Yes, I, like many other agents, my desire to be an FBI agent actually goes back to my early childhood. And I had gone to college at Elizabethtown and then went on for a master's degree at Northeastern in Boston. But I had changed my major to criminal justice. And it was there that I was introduced to the field of terrorism. Now, this was 1985, so this is many years prior to 9/11. And when I finished that degree, I had considered applying to the FBI at that time, but like many others, got caught up in a hiring freeze. So I decided to continue with my education, but I switched back to political science, but still wanted to study terrorism, but within the context of the discipline of political science. So then I went to Temple University, and that degree, took a good 7 years. So when I had finished, it was in the early 90s, and I accepted a position as an assistant professor of political science at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, where I continued to teach terrorism at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and my research interest was in terrorism, as was my dissertation. So about my second academic year at Ohio University that I applied to the FBI, and when I did, as you mentioned, I did in fact market myself as someone who had an expertise in terrorism. So I went to the academy. It was in November of 95. And when I completed my rotation in the Philadelphia division, I spoke to the SAC and I expressed my interest in going to the JTTF. And I was assigned there when I completed my new agent rotation. And then for the next 19 years, worked with the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
It's great that they looked at your credentials, academic, and of course, just your knowledge, and placed you where you could help the Bureau the most, because we all know that it's always for the good of the Bureau.
Sure. And too, since it was 1995, 1996, working counterterrorism was not something that many agents wanted to do. And now today, of course, it's probably 50% of what we do. But back then, the percentage of agents working that violation was much, much less. And listeners might be interested to know that I believe the first Joint Terrorism Task Force of the FBI was set up in 1986 in New York, but Philadelphia was close after that in 1988. Okay. So there was a long-standing Joint Terrorism Task Force prior to 9/11.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the Joint Terrorism Task Force? What that comprises, all the different agencies and the work that the JTTF does.
Sure. Back in the late 90s, the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Philadelphia had the local Philadelphia police, the New Jersey State Police, immigration, as it was known at that time, Pennsylvania State Police. And we all worked very closely. And the same holds true for today, that, the agencies bring their different tools to the war, and we leverage one another's expertise and identify and neutralize the terrorist threat wherever it may be. And oftentimes, especially prior to 9/11, most of those successes did not take the form of an arrest for terrorism. People were often arrested for other violations, immigration violations or local violations, but we still considered them a success.
And that makes sense because, again, I don't want to state what the main goal of counterterrorism is. I think it'd be better for you to state the main goal. And the main goal would be? To identify and to disrupt any terrorist threat. If you can identify someone that could be a threat and use whatever tools you can to get them out of the country, exactly, then that is a success. Exactly. And sometimes, at least historically, the FBI has been criticized for that. I know at one time there were some members of Congress that questioned why we were claiming, the JTTF was claiming successes for things like immigration arrests or arrests for maybe possession of a weapon or for drugs. And, as you know, sometimes someone is engaged in criminal behavior, but you don't have sufficient probable cause to make an arrest. And so when we identify someone who is engaged in some sort of terrorist activity, we will use any means available to us. And we do consider that a success. Talk to me a little bit about somebody maybe coming here to on a visa for educational purposes, and then you discover that they're not attending the college.
Sure. I've always been a firm believer that one of the most valuable participants to the Joint Terrorism Task Force is immigration. So we work extremely closely with them in Philadelphia as we did in South Jersey. And prior to this more current homegrown violent extremist threat, many of our cases have an immigration nexus to it because we're dealing with people who are in the United States both legally and illegally. And people may come into the United States through the border illegally, but through my experience, it's more often that they come in with a tourist or a student visa and just overstay the visa.
And how do we discover that? I mean, what are the methods, if you can tell me?
Sure.
I don't want you to talk about anything, and I'm sure you don't either, that would be giving away any type of secrets or classified information, but how do you become aware of somebody who has overstayed their visa?
Well, of course, through immigration, through the State Department, through people in the community that might learn that someone is here illegally and notify the FBI. So there are a number of safeguards in place, but as we all know, there are a large number of people that are in this country illegally.
Well, why don't we go now into, you've had, in this particular area, counterterrorism, you have experience of a lot of overseas travel, TDYs and assignments. So can we go through some of those so people can get an understanding of, how much experience that you have in this area?
Sure. Just a few of my overseas trips. I was in Guantanamo Bay as an interrogator in April of 2002, and this was about 7 months after 9/11. So there were new detainees that were arriving from Afghanistan while I was there. That was also during the transition where they were building a new detention center for the detainees. So I was able to work in both the old and the newer facilities there. And we worked very closely with the investigative components of the military services, NCIS, OSI, CID, and we were partnered together. And often with a translator, we would spend all day, every day, basically interrogating the different detainees in order to extract intelligence that would be helpful to the intelligence community.
Well, as a woman, did you see any resistance? Was there any resistance because you were a female when talking to these detainees? I'm
so glad you asked me that question because I have been asked that question throughout my career. And when I was a newer agent, I had read a publication and I believe it was put out by the Bureau, that talked about that specific issue. It said that American women were perceived in a separate category from women of the Middle East, and that many of Middle Eastern men just put us in this separate category and so didn't have the same preconceptions or didn't treat us the same as other women. So I took that article to heart. And I can honestly say that in my 19 years, I never experienced a situation in which someone refused to speak with me or deal with me, and that includes my time at Guantanamo. In fact, there were actually a few detainees that were just so, think of the word, they were just found themselves they were in amazement that they were sitting in a room, sometimes with all women, because sometimes it might be two female interrogators and a female translator and a detainee. Some of them were just like, you could tell they were just very excited and would ask questions and talk to us as if almost we were in a social setting. But I can say that I did not experience that.
Well, in a way, it sounds like it was an advantage.
Yes. And we, my main partner, down at Guantanamo was an OSI male agent, and we did. We used our different genders to our advantage, sure.
And how long were you in Guantanamo?
It's about 5, 6 weeks.
And then that information, of course, was sent to the various field offices where the information was pertinent, I take it.
Sure, yes.
And your next assignment?
I also spent about a month in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and that was actually on the first anniversary of 9/11. So on the actual anniversary of 9/11, there were some security concerns at the embassy because there were some protests going on. But I spent about 30 days there, and I'm glad I did that because working on the JTTF and most of my assignments had a Middle East nexus to it. I wanted the opportunity to go to a place like Saudi Arabia so that when I spoke to someone, I could at least say, you know, I have some knowledge of your culture. I spent some time there, and that was a incredible experience.
I would imagine so. And can you tell me if there were any differences, you know, when you were, going around, the country, the different cities? Did you experience any type of discrimination, or did you again see yourself put into a different category, and that it was advantageous that you were a female FBI agent?
Yeah, there was a lot of public interest in our presence. While I was there, there was another female agent and a male agent. And so most of our work there, we did not interact with Saudi nationals. We were doing more work within the embassy, but we were out socially nearly every day. And, we would go out in groups, and there was a lot of interest, and there were many women there when myself and the other female agent were out together, and we would wear the abaya. Some may know it as a burqa, though we didn't have to wear the head covering. But some of the Saudi women there actually would follow us because they were just curious. And of course, they had the religious police. And there were times when the religious police would approach us. And one time in particular, I was in the Kingdom Mall, and a very high-end mall. And it was, at that time, we were told it was the only place that we were allowed to go to as a woman by ourselves. So it was my last night there, and I said, well, I wanted to have this experience. So I went to the mall, and there was a member of the religious police who was there who followed me around and constantly came up in close proximity to me, very upset that I was not covering my hair, which I did attempt to do out of respect. I did voluntarily go to that country after all, but it was never to his satisfaction. But as I said, it was a very high-end mall, and on the first floor you would see a lot of families or groups of women in the full abaya walking about. But then there were elevators, and they were guarded, and they had signs on them, women only. And once you went into the elevator and went on to the second floor, you would think you were in a large mall in New York City. The abayas came out. It was women only, and it was just an incredible experience from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. And the reason I'm fascinated with this is because as a woman FBI agent, I rarely experience any type of discrimination when I was going out to do interviews
Sure.
or to conduct searches or arrests. No one ever said, oh my God, I even though, there are 20%, 25% of the FBI are women agents. I mean, it just was never a problem. But so it's fascinating to me to hear, about these differences, in different cultures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you ever have any female detainees, and how was that relationship?
No, we did not.
It's interesting. Maybe not back then, but I would imagine now people working in counterterrorism, they're going to be seeing more and more women as the targets of terrorism-type investigations.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Any other overseas trips? Or
only one other I'd like to mention. That was I spent some time in Israel, where I was fortunate enough to receive interrogation training, and this was in 2004. But while I was there, it was the time that Sheikh Yassin, who was the spiritual leader of Hamas, was killed by the Israelis. So that was a interesting and intense time to be there.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. What was the reaction between the people? After
he was killed, we were advised not to leave the embassy grounds, and so we didn't interact much with the Israeli people following that. But because the training was given by Israeli officials, it showed me, and again, this is, a few years after 9/11, but it kind of demonstrated to me the different mentality that the Israelis had to the Americans. I mean, while we were in training, there was more than one occasion where they had to rush out because they had just intercepted a suicide bomber at a checkpoint. And so just that need to react immediately to these threats of violence was something that, at least historically, was different from what we experienced in the U.S. Obviously 9/11, but in general, it's not as if JTTF members are sitting at their desks waiting for, a suicide bomber to show up at any moment. Of course, now with the homegrown violent extremist threat, it's a little different. But even pre-9/11, a lot of our effort was focused on terrorism financing, for instance. So it was just a different mentality.
And I know this is going to be a difficult question for you to answer, but what do you think is the reason? And of course, we are absolutely fortunate, and that we don't see the same amount of violence and threats here in the United States. But what do you think we can, say is the reason for that? I mean, we have not had, the bombings in, airports and train stations. What do you think is the reason for that?
Sure. I would say that I would make a difference between what I would call the pre-homegrown violent extremist threat and the post-homegrown violent extremist threat. And I think previous to the HVE threat, those sorts of attacks would come from individuals traveling overseas to the United States to carry it out. And I think that our intelligence efforts and law enforcement efforts were relatively successful. But I would make a distinction, because now what we might call the post-HVE threat, the threat comes from inside. So now it's a different type of threat, and now the threat is already in our midst, either developed or waiting to be developed or exploited by terrorist groups overseas, either through inspiration or through direct interaction from online activities. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that now there is a greater threat, as you described.
Wow. And we do see that.
Yes.
And we do see incidents occurring, and that the credit has been given to overseas terrorist groups as being at least the inspiration, if not the direct reason for it.
Exactly.
The initials that you were using, what are the initials, and could you tell us what that stands for?
Yes. HVE, Homegrown Violent Extremists.
Well, that's a new one. I was not aware of that term. Thank you for explaining that to us. Well, let's move on, because you mentioned domestic, our homegrown terrorist, and that, of course, is something that is very frightening, because you're talking about possibly American citizens who have lived here for most of their lives that you would never suspect participating in terrorist activities.
Yes. And one of the analogies I make is that the homegrown violent extremist threat is much like the active shooter threat in that it can happen anywhere and anytime. And local police departments, of course, realize the active shooter threat, but now they have to take on the responsibility now to also identify potential homegrown violent extremists, because they really can happen in small towns where one might not think a terrorist would live or that would be the target of a terrorist attack.
Yeah, that's it's very frightening, when you see what's happening overseas to realize, that potentially, could happen more and more here in the United States, where you're just, going to the mall and minding your own business.
Exactly.
This is definitely a different world today. When did you retire?
November 30th, 2015.
2015. So it's it hasn't even been a year yet.
No, it has not.
So when you see things like, what happened this week, how do you feel? Do you miss it?
I think we all retire when we know it's time to allow the next generation of agents to take on that responsibility. But since I have returned to teaching and a lot of my students are in the military, I feel like I'm still making a contribution by sharing my knowledge and experiences with those who are studying national security.
Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Well, I am teaching part-time for 3 different universities, Rutgers University, and I teach up at their campus at Joint Base, Fort Dix, McGuire, and Lakehurst. And I also teach for American Public University Systems, in which the vast majority of their students are with the military. That is an online university. And this semester I started teaching for Camden County College. So all within the political science departments or Homeland Security Studies departments.
And that is good, that you're passing on your knowledge, your expertise, your experience onto these new terrorism warriors.
Yeah. I like that.
All right. What I'd like to do now is to maybe look at some of the cases that you worked that you can tell us about. And again, we all understand that there'll be some areas that you will not be able to discuss, and we're okay with that. Okay. We're okay with that. We certainly don't want to give our enemies any of our secrets, our inside information. But why don't we talk first about a case that had to do with a threat from overseas here in the U.S.?
Sure, and I believe you're talking about the Aga Ali Abbas Kalzabash case.
Yes, I am. I just couldn't pronounce it.
And that's a case that took place in the summer-fall of 2003. And we had received information that this individual, Kalzabash, who was from Pakistan, was in the United States illegally, that he had overstayed his visa, and that he was in the Philadelphia area. So we had also received some information that there was some potential security concerns about him. So we went to, or members of the JTTF went to his residence, and he worked as a cab driver in the city of Philadelphia, and he was not home at the time. And his wife, Humaya Jawed, basically denied any knowledge of his whereabouts or his activities. We subsequently found out that after the JTTF agents and task force officers left her residence, she had called her husband, Kalzabash, some 14 times over the next 9 hours, presumably to tell him that the JTTF and immigration agents were looking for him. When we looked further into the matter, we had discovered that not only had he overstayed his visa, but he had obtained fraudulent documents and established a second identity known as Hussein Ali. So his wife, Humaya, who was in the Philadelphia area as well, did not come to the United States with him. She had come on a student visa, but had never attended school, and therefore she was in violation of her immigration status. And she and Kalzelbosh had several children. At least one child was born here in the U.S., which is pertinent in the sense that she was telling us that she did not have contact with him. Well, once he obtained this alternate identity, he married a U.S. citizen who was also a member of the United States military. So
wow.
He was leading this dual life.
And I take it this American citizen was unaware of his marriage, his prior marriage.
Yes. And that person was never prosecuted. So through our investigation, we learned that he did have an association with a terrorist group in Pakistan. And so we were able to execute a search warrant at his residence with his, I will refer to her as his Pakistani wife. And we discovered numerous documents which confirmed this link. He was actually the central vice president of an organization called SMP, which is Sapai Mohammed, or Party of God. Now, according to the documents that he had in his possession, he was the highest ranking member of this organization, the founder having been killed and the president who was incarcerated at that time in Pakistan. He also had a business card with his name on it and the title Central Vice President. He had a constitution of the organization in which it stated their goal was jihad and martyrdom.
Wow.
He had numerous police records and medical records in his name showing that he was a member of this organization, that he had engaged in violent activities, that he had been involved in a gun battle with the Pakistani police and had actually been shot. Even though this information was found in this small apartment he shared with his wife, she denied any knowledge of those activities. Now, the group, Sapai Mohammed Pakistan, I should say, was not designated a terrorist organization in the United States. It was a group in Pakistan that was comprised of Shia Muslims, and they engaged in violent activities with other religious groups in Pakistan.
Okay.
So the fact that he was here in the United States, knowing that background information about him, and knowing that he was living this double life, it was obviously someone that we wanted to speak to. So the fact that his Pakistani wife lied to us about his whereabouts and, in essence, helped him. He fled the Philadelphia area for New York, and 2 days after we went to his apartment, he actually fled the United States and returned to Pakistan. So we were never able to interview him or to discover what his purpose was for being in the United States. But what we did do was we did arrest his Pakistani wife for providing false statements to the JTTF, or lying to the JTTF, and she spent 16 months in federal prison and then was deported. Now, there was another individual who was also arrested, and that was Hamid Sheikh. Hamid Sheikh was a friend of Kalzelbosh, and he too was a cab driver. And he had entered the United States many years prior to 2003, and he admitted that he entered the United States illegally. And when we...
Did he say how?
You know what? I don't recall at the moment, but he said, I don't think, I'm not sure if he overstayed his visa, because I remember him saying that he entered illegally. So I'm not recalling that at the moment. But I believe it was in the 80s. It was in the mid 80s. So he was in the United States for many years illegally. And we interviewed him, and he admitted knowing Kalzelbosh, and he claimed that he was going to assist us in finding Kalzabash. He claimed that Kalzabash was still in the Philadelphia area, and he was working with us to try to find him. Well, he knew all along that Kalzabash was not in Philadelphia and had fled the United States because he was the one that drove Kalzabash to purchase the airline tickets and knew that he had fled for Pakistan.
Was the reason that he was telling you that he was cooperating so that he could remain here in the country, or maybe get extra bonus points towards his being able to stay?
He may have been thinking that, because obviously he knew that he had an immigration problem, but there were no promises or even discussions along those lines at this point. He claimed that he wanted to assist us in finding Kalzabash. So by misleading us, allowed Kalzabash to escape the United States. So he was arrested on immigration charges, but he was also arrested for providing false statements to the JTTF. Now, what's interesting about his arrest is that he was eventually ordered removed from the United States on national security grounds. And the actual immigration statute allows for an alien to be removed if they've engaged in criminal activity that endangers public safety or national security. And this statute had been used before people engaged perhaps in drug trafficking. I mean, that's a threat to public safety. And so they've been removed under that grounds. Well, here, this was either the first or one of the first cases in which immigration was asking a judge to remove an individual on the basis that his criminal activity endangered national security. And so the argument that was raised was because Hamid Sheikh lied to the JTTF about the whereabouts of Kalzabash, the JTTF devoted resources. And we have to remember, we're talking about federal agents on the JTTF, task force officers on the JTTF, analysts, surveillance specialists. Most of the resources in the Philadelphia division were devoted, or JTTF resources were devoted to finding Kalzabash. And so the argument was, because Hamid Sheikh diverted those resources to look for Kalzabash when he knew Kalzabash wasn't in the United States, meant that the JTTF was not working other national security matters. And that was the threat to national security, that he prevented the JTTF from working other national security matters. So he was eventually ordered removed on that basis.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I know that you've given me some newspaper articles about your testimony in court regarding this legal matter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I will link those newspaper articles at jerrywilliams.com for those listeners who want to get a little bit more details about the court case and how you were able to prevail.
And it's a great example of the contribution that immigration makes to the war on terrorism.
Right. And everything that you've told me today was part of your testimony in court.
Yes.
It's great to see all the different tools that come together to help us in that mission.
Yes. Yes, it is.
All right. Can you tell us now about a homegrown terrorism case?
Sure. We can talk a little bit about Jihad Jane, or Colleen LaRose.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And she was arrested in October of 2009. And so we're talking, 6 years back. And she brought to the forefront the threat of homegrown violent extremists. Now, we have had other homegrown violent extremists in the Philadelphia division. For instance, the Fort Dix case would be an example. So there were homegrown violent extremists before her. But what she brought to our attention was the threat of the homegrown violent extremists within the context of online activities. And
could you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. And what at the time, and again, this is 6 years ago, what we found so incredible about this case was here was a woman, and I think most people know that she came from a very difficult background, and she had limited formal education. And she converted to Islam online. She radicalized online. She interacted with other extremists worldwide, other extremists within the United States, in Ireland, in Pakistan, just to name a few places. She engaged in violation of federal law, specifically the material support of terrorism law, by recruiting others for jihad. She planned the terrorist attack. If you recall, she was planning on assassinating the Swedish cartoonist Lars Vilks. But she did all of that without once ever meeting with a person in person here in the United States. She never met with anyone in person, and yet she engaged in all of that activity online. And so all
of this sounds like it was self-motivated. Then she sought this out.
Yes, and she.
Or is that true? Or was she some way seduced online?
Well,
was she groomed online?
She claims that she, once she converted online and she began to view different videos and whatnot about events in the Middle East, that she became more and more radical. I mean, could she have fallen into some other group? Sure. But she was, I would say that she was self-radicalized.
Would you compare this, or can we compare this to somebody who may find themselves falling into a cult?
No, I think that's a good analogy. I would maybe make the analogy of a gang, that gangs are attractive to young people in certain communities. They serve a need that these people have. And she was basically housebound in the sense that she was the caregiver for an elderly person. So she generally wasn't out and about interacting a lot in public. She spent all day, every day, at her home online. But clearly this group provided or satisfied some need that she had.
Some need to belong, some need to feel needed.
Yes.
Well, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Because I know the description of her. I've seen pictures of her. It's a white female, blonde, attractive, just not someone that you would feel. That's correct, right?
Yes, that is correct. And she was well aware of that. I mean, she said specifically that her gender and her race and her physical appearance, that she was going to use those things to carry out her assassination. She thought that would gain her access to places and she would be able to operate under the radar of law enforcement because of those attributes.
And can you tell us, and I know there's lots of newspaper articles, et cetera, but from what you can tell us from the JTTF viewpoint, how did you discover her, if you can tell me that, and how far did she go before you discovered her?
Well, what I can say is that she was very active online. She made no attempts to conceal her radical behavior. She made no attempts to conceal her interaction with other radicals. So there was no shortage of people online who weren't aware of her activities. Okay.
Very, very good. And so what happened with her? If you could tell us how this story ends.
Well, she was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder overseas, material support and false statements, to about 10 years. And some of her co-conspirators that she recruited online for her mission, Jamie Ramirez, she was sentenced, I believe, to 8 years, and Mohammed Khalid was sentenced to 5 years. And he was a juvenile when he was engaged in this activity. So I believe he was the first juvenile charged with material support.
Now, do you know if there's been any books, true crime books written about Jihad Jane?
Well, I know it's funny you should say that, because just the other day I came across an article online that a criminologist is writing a book from the perspective of the terrorists themselves. And she claims that she had written letters to a number of people convicted, including Jihad Jane, and that Colleen LaRose responded to her and gave her opinions as to why she did what she did, and that this criminologist is writing a book. So I'm not surprised. But she, according to this criminologist, Colleen LaRose still does not express any remorse for her activities. And that was another thing. And as you know, oftentimes when someone commits a crime, they usually do express remorse, particularly at the time of sentencing. And yes. She was adamant that the only reason she did not carry out her mission, her plan to assassinate Lars Vilks, was because her co-conspirators overseas weren't ready to carry it out. That she went with the intention of doing it, and she actually expressed frustration to us that they weren't prepared to actually do it.
Unbelievable. And so she is incarcerated.
Yes.
Here now in the United States? And do you know what type of sentence she received?
Yes, 10 years.
10 years. All right, Kathy, this has been fascinating. Now, when you left the FBI, you were supervising could you tell us what you were doing when you left the FBI?
Sure. So I worked, 13 years as a case agent, 12 years of that on the JTTF. And then at year 13, became the supervisor of the JTTF in Philadelphia. I was in that position for 3 years, and then I moved over to our Cherry Hill office in South Jersey and supervised the South Jersey JTTF, as well as some criminal programs for the next 4 years.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, I am very, very proud of your service to the FBI.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing that the work that you and your fellow team members are doing. It's a different FBI from when I joined in 1982, when we were doing a lot more of the basic criminal work, white collar crime, which I did my entire career, and of course the bank robberies and things like that, drug cases. This is definitely a new FBI, but one for the times.
Sure.
Someone needs to do this work. We need to do it with our law enforcement partners, working very closely together. Could you describe the JTTF so people get a real understanding when we talk about working with our partners, how we're set up to do that?
Sure. Well, the JTTF is comprised of FBI agents and other federal agencies, IRS, DEA, ATF, state partners from state police and local departments, local police departments, and the non-federal agents are deputized as federal officers. So they have the same responsibilities and duties that I would as an FBI agent. But what they bring with them is experiences and resources, and knowledge. And so we work hand in hand with one another, on all cases. It's a great concept. It's been a very effective concept. And the JTTF still to this day, continues to grow.
And you sit side by side in the squad area.
Absolutely. The same responsibilities, the same expectations. Some task force officers and federal agents are assigned to the JTTF full time. The JTTF's are housed in FBI facilities. And they report to the FBI supervisor, but often their chain of command also has security clearances. So everyone that needs to be briefed on current threats or cases are briefed on a routine basis. And there's a great deal of sharing information, sharing resources, and it's a very effective task force.
And so those criticisms that were received that we weren't working together right after 9/11, would you say that they have been almost or completely eliminated?
Yes, we did. Even pre-9/11, in the context of the JTTF, there was still a great deal of communication and cooperation. And I've always thought that part of that wasn't necessarily the structure, it was the culture. As you know, there was historically a lot of mistrust from state and local agencies to the FBI. And, you know, my own experiences, and I know, you know, others have probably had this as well, that even when we tried to share information, there was just a mistrust that we were holding back. And sometimes we were, but that was regulated by law or policy. But I think the culture has changed. I think that agencies now know that we do share information, we do coordinate, and we do work together. But there are times, because terrorism cases are by their nature classified, so there are limits. And I think that's the challenge we have now, is that I think we have the structure for that cooperation, but there are still legal limitations. And so how do we address those? And that's something that policymakers have to address. That's not something I think that the FBI can address.
Well said. Well said. Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we've talked a lot about the FBI and our partners and what they do on an everyday basis. The people that are listening, you know, the everyday people who are going about their business, what would you tell them as far as what they could do to help, what they could do to, help us all be safe as we go about our business every day?
No,
what role could they play?
No, thanks again for asking that question, because one of the questions I've been asked in the past is what I saw as the main difference between working counterterrorism pre-9/11 and post-9/11. And even though there was a proliferation of agents working counterterrorism following 9/11, there weren't too many people that had the experience of working at pre and post 9/11. And so, in my opinion, the greatest difference I saw, sure, there were changes in law and policy with the Patriot Act, but the greatest difference I saw was the sense of responsibility that everyone feels for combating terrorism. And that includes the general public. That now people accept that it's also their responsibility, that if they see something or feel that something just isn't right, call your local FBI, notify your local police. The system is in place. That information that you provide to the local police through fusion centers will get to the people that need to know that information.
Okay, and that's that whole see something, say something message.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much. And
thank you.
That's the end. And that's the end of the show. Wasn't I right? Wasn't that a great interview and so timely? Thank you again, Kathy Lambert. Now, I am recording this on March 25th, my birthday. It has been such a great year. I retired from the FBI in 2008, and I took a second career job with SEPTA, the Public Transportation Agency for Philadelphia. I did that for 7 years, and I retired from that job just 4 months ago. And since then, my creative juices have been flowing. I had already written my novel, but I'm starting to work on the second novel, and I decided to do this podcast, and I'm so glad that I did. If you have not gotten around to getting me a birthday gift, it's not too late. You can still go to iTunes, subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review, rate the podcast if you're enjoying it. And another suggestion for a great birthday gift would be for you to go to my website and sign up for my email list and my crime fiction newsletter. The very first newsletter is going to be going out to email subscribers in mid-April. I have started working on that. I have a list of some really great crime fiction, the books that I love and would like to recommend to you. I am also writing an essay for that newsletter where I really go into some of the TV shows that are on right now about the FBI. Doesn't it seem like every time you turn on TV, there is a TV show that features FBI agents? I'm not talking about them just walking through, just all of the shows that are on right now about the FBI. In this essay, I go through what they get wrong, what they get right, how I feel about these shows. It's all entertainment. It's all good. It's all giving the public a good understanding of what we do. But I hope that FBI Retired Case File Review really gives you the truth behind the FBI and gives you a good public perception of what the FBI does. Remember that the last 5 years of my FBI career, I was the media spokesperson in the Philadelphia office, so I'm used to promoting the FBI, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity post-retirement to continue to do that. So thank you so much for listening to the show. I'm continue to be amazed at the huge number of people that are listening, and I want to make sure that you understand how much I appreciate your being a part of this. The last thing I have to say is that this episode is sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you.